In a jaw-dropping revelation, Rebecca Lamb breaks her silence, exposing shocking secrets about her mother Joni Lamb and her new husband dougweiss. The explosive drama surrounding the Daystar family has reached a boiling point, and Rebecca pulls back the curtain on years of hidden truths. From deep family rifts to secretive behavior, this revelation will leave you speechless. Brace yourself for the untold story that will shake Daystar to its core. For years, Rebecca Lamb lived under the heavy weight of silence. The non-disclosure agreement, NDA, that she and her husband, JW, had signed kept them bound by legal constraints that made it impossible to speak out about the troubling issues they saw within their own family. This NDA wasn't just a legal formality. It was a barrier that trapped Rebecca, preventing her from speaking up about things she knew were wrong, things that made her uncomfortable, and things that, as a mother, she felt should never have been hidden. It was an agreement that prevented her from revealing disturbing behavior she had witnessed from a trusted family member, Pete. She had seen things that no one should ever have to see, things that made her fear for the safety of baby Lamb, someone she loved and cared for deeply. Rebecca knew in her heart that something was wrong, but the NDA was a constant reminder that she couldn't talk about it, no matter how much it weighed on her conscience. Every time she tried to express her concerns or raise the alarm, she was stopped by the looming threat of legal repercussion. She couldn't ask for help, and she couldn't speak out. The silence wasn't just uncomfortable, it felt suffocating, like a constant presence that haunted every moment of her life. Rebecca wasn't just trapped by the legal document, she was trapped by her own loyalty to her family. She had always been taught to protect her family, to stand by them through thick and thin. But now, that same loyalty felt like a prison. She knew that the family's reputation, the legacy they had built together through Daystar, was important, but it wasn't the only thing that mattered. She knew, deep down, that protecting her family meant doing what was morally right, not keeping silent about things that could harm them. This internal struggle between loyalty and doing what was right ate away at Rebecca. She couldn't shake the knowledge that something terrible had happened, and that the silence she was living with was allowing it to continue. But breaking the silence wasn't as simple as it seemed. She feared the consequences not just for her family's reputation, but for her own life. The NDA had created a system where speaking the truth came with a heavy price. It wasn't just about being legally bound, it was about the deep emotional conflict of choosing between the family she loved and the right thing to do. Each day, the weight of silence grew heavier. It wasn't just about being silent to protect a public image, it was about the toll it was taking on her mentally and emotionally. Every time she looked at baby Lamb, knowing what she knew, Rebecca felt a wave of guilt wash over her. She couldn't escape the feeling that staying silent was allowing something terrible to happen, and yet, there was nothing she could do. She was trapped in her own life, forced to keep quiet about something that needed to be addressed. But as time went on, the silence became unbearable. Rebecca's internal conflict reached a breaking point. She knew she couldn't keep living this way, but she didn't know what to do. Every day, the tension grew, and her frustration with the situation deepened. The silence felt suffocating, but the consequences of breaking it were too great. Rebecca was stuck in a seemingly impossible position, and the burden of that silence threatened to tear her apart. Rebecca Lamb had always prided herself on being a loyal family member. Raised in a household where unity and devotion were the cornerstones, she had always stood by her family, no matter the circumstances. She was raised to protect the Lamb name, uphold the values that Marcus and Joni Lamb instilled in their children, and defend their shared mission to spread the Christian faith through the Daystar network. For years, it was never a question for Rebecca. Family came first, but that sense of unwavering loyalty was starting to conflict with something much deeper, her own sense of integrity. As the years went on, Rebecca found herself in a difficult position. After her father Marcus's sudden death in 2021, the dynamic within the family changed drastically. Joni Lamb, who had been the supportive wife, was now forced to step into a much more prominent role in Daystar. She was navigating grief while trying to maintain control of the network her husband had built. But then, Joni's relationship with Dr. dougweiss, a family friend and marriage counselor, began to complicate things further. From the beginning, Rebecca felt uneasy. She wasn't necessarily opposed to her mother finding love again, but the speed at which Joni entered this new relationship troubled her. Marcus had only been gone for a short time, and Rebecca was concerned that her mother wasn't giving herself enough time to grieve. To Rebecca, this wasn't just about the relationship, It was about the message it sent to the world. The Lamb family had always been held up as an example of Christian values, with Daystar at the forefront of that message. If people saw Joni moving on so quickly, how would it affect the ministry? Would people question the authenticity of their values? Would they wonder if Joni truly believed in the vows of marriage that she had taken with Marcus? Rebecca tried to voice her concerns in a calm and respectful manner, but each time she did, she was met with resistance. Joni, still wrapped in the emotions of her new relationship, didn't seem to take her daughter's concerns seriously. The relationship was moving quickly, and Rebecca didn't think it was healthy for either her mother or for their family. To her, it felt like Joni was rushing into a situation that could have far-reaching consequences, but Joni didn't listen. Instead, she dismissed Rebecca's thoughts, and that's when the first cracks began to show. The family had always been united, always had open communication, but now, it seemed as though Rebecca was being pushed aside. This wasn't just about one person's choice, it was about the impact it had on the entire family, including the ministry they had built together. Rebecca was struggling to reconcile her loyalty to her mother with the values she held dear. She didn't want to be the one to challenge her mother, especially in such a delicate time. But Rebecca's internal battle was becoming harder and harder to ignore. She felt torn between the family loyalty that had been instilled in her since birth and her deep-rooted belief in integrity and honesty. She didn't want to stand by and watch her mother's decisions potentially destroy everything the family had worked for. She wanted to speak up, to say something, but every time she did, she was either dismissed or told that she didn't understand. The emotional toll of the situation weighed heavily on her, but it wasn't just the tension with her mother. It was also the pressure from within the ministry. As Joni's relationship with Doug continued to escalate, so did the tension between Rebecca and the rest of her family. The more Rebecca voiced her concerns, the more isolated she felt. It wasn't just about the relationship anymore. It was about everything that had been built. The ministry, their reputation, their shared values. Every decision seemed to be made by Joni, and every time Rebecca tried to speak up, she was pushed further away. The once tight-knit family began to unravel, and Rebecca felt helpless to stop it. The struggle for integrity was growing within Rebecca's heart. She couldn't stand by and watch her family ignore the issues that were at the core of their ministry. The silence that was forced upon her by the NDA, the silence about the troubling things happening behind the scenes, was starting to eat away at her. She knew something wasn't right, but she couldn't speak out. She felt like she was trapped in a web of loyalty to her family and the need to protect their public image. The truth was being hidden, and Rebecca was trapped in a cycle of guilt and frustration. At what point would her loyalty to the family give way to her need for personal integrity? The struggle was real. If Rebecca spoke out, she would be betraying the very family she loved, the family that had built Daystar. But if she stayed silent, she would be betraying herself and the values she had been raised to uphold. The guilt she carried weighed heavily on her heart, and it wasn't long before Rebecca began to withdraw emotionally, retreating further into herself as the pressure mounted. But it wasn't just the relationship with Doug that Rebecca had to navigate. There was a much deeper issue at hand, secrets that had been kept for far too long. The NDA Rebecca had signed had kept her quiet, but as the truth began to surface, Rebecca realized that she couldn't stay silent forever. The weight of that secrecy was crushing her, and as much as she tried to protect her family, she knew that protecting them now meant telling the truth. Rebecca's dilemma was not unique to her family. It was a reflection of the struggle many face when personal integrity collides with familial loyalty. How could she stay true to her faith and the values her family had worked so hard to build while also being true to herself? The burden of keeping secrets, the pressure of maintaining appearances, and the feeling of being trapped between these two conflicting desires was taking its toll on Rebecca. The more she tried to stay silent, the harder it became to hold it all together. She was torn between doing what was morally right and maintaining loyalty to her family, which was the very foundation of her life. This internal conflict consumed Rebecca and made her feel increasingly isolated. Her once strong and loving connection to her family was now strained, and her conscience was pulling her in a different direction, towards the truth. Rebecca's struggle with integrity versus loyalty was only getting worse. The family was crumbling, and with each passing day, the emotional divide grew larger. She didn't know how much longer she could keep quiet. Something had to change, but what could she do? Could she sacrifice her values to keep the family together? Or would she have to make the painful decision to stand up for the truth, even if it meant breaking apart the family she had always loved. As the tension reached its peak, Rebecca had to make a choice that would change everything. Whether to continue hiding the truth or to face the consequences of speaking out. The decision would be one of the hardest of her life, and no matter what, nothing would ever be the same again. The tension in the Lamb family had been building for months. What once seemed like small disagreements, misunderstandings, and differences in opinion had gradually escalated into something much more significant. For Rebecca Lamb, it felt as though her world was slowly unraveling around her. The family she had always known, the family that had built Daystar television together, was starting to break apart, and she felt like she was caught in the middle of it all. Her mother, Joni Lamb, had always been the center of their family. She was strong, charismatic, and held the entire family together, both personally and professionally. But after the sudden death of Marcus Lamb in 2021, things began to change. Joni, who had been Marcus's partner in life and in ministry, was left to carry the weight of their shared legacy. What followed was a whirlwind of decisions, and the most controversial one of all was her relationship with Doug. Rebecca had always been close to her mother, but this relationship with Doug stirred something deep inside her. From the moment she learned about it, something didn't sit right. Rebecca had always respected her mother's grief after Marcus's death, but this new relationship seemed to move too fast, too soon. Joni had only recently lost her husband, and Rebecca couldn't understand how her mother could jump into something so quickly. It wasn't just about the relationship itself. It was about everything it represented. Rebecca was struggling with the idea that her mother was replacing Marcus so soon without allowing herself the time to truly grieve. It wasn't about Doug as a person, it was about what he represented in the wake of Marcus's death. To Rebecca, it felt as though Joni was choosing to move on in a way that undermined the memory of her father. Their family had always been centered around strong values of faith, commitment, and integrity, and Rebecca feared that this relationship, so soon after Marcus's passing, would raise questions about the Lamb family's ability to uphold those values. As time went on, Rebecca's discomfort with the relationship grew. What started as a nagging feeling in the back of her mind became a full-blown concern. Rebecca, known for being outspoken and honest, tried to voice her feelings to Joni, hoping for an open conversation. But Joni wasn't receptive. Instead of listening, Joni became defensive, brushing off her daughter's concerns as if they didn't matter. Every attempt Rebecca made to talk about it was met with resistance. At first, it was subtle, a change of subject or a quiet dismissal. But as time went on, it became more apparent that Joni wasn't interested in hearing Rebecca's perspective. The emotional divide between them began to grow. Joni seemed determined to move forward with her relationship, while Rebecca felt like she was losing her mother. This wasn't just about Doug. It was about the core of their family, the values they had always stood for, and the direction their ministry was headed. Rebecca started to feel more and more like an outsider in her own family. She wasn't just disagreeing with her mother's relationship. She was questioning the decisions Joni was making for their family and their ministry. Rebecca wasn't the only one who noticed the change. The once collaborative nature of their family dynamics was beginning to shift. Joni was making decisions on her own, with little input from anyone else. This shift in control unsettled Rebecca. She had always been a part of the decision-making process within their family, but now it felt like Joni was running everything by herself. There was no room for input, no space for conversation. It was as if everything had changed overnight. The tension between mother and daughter reached a boiling point one evening in May 2023, just weeks before Joni's wedding to Doug. It wasn't planned. There wasn't any prearranged moment for them to sit down and talk. Instead, it happened suddenly. A raw, emotional confrontation neither of them could have predicted. The frustration that had been building for months spilled out in a way that was unanticipated and uncontainable. Rebecca, in her usual way, expressed her concerns with passion and determination. She didn't hold back. She told Joni exactly how she felt, how she believed her mother wasn't giving herself enough time to grieve, how she thought moving forward with Doug so soon was damaging to their family's reputation. Rebecca's words were heartfelt, but they came with a level of intensity that Joni wasn't prepared for. Her mother, instead of responding with empathy or understanding, snapped back with frustration. "I'm just trying to move on," Joni said, her voice sharp and defensive. "I don't need this right now." The words stung Rebecca deeply. She wasn't trying to control her mother's life. She was trying to protect the family, protect their legacy. But Joni didn't see it that way. It wasn't just about Doug or the relationship. It was about the lack of respect for the values they had always held dear. It was about feeling like she was losing her mother to someone else, to something that wasn't in line with the faith and principles they had always stood for. The confrontation left Rebecca heartbroken. She had hoped for an open dialogue, but instead she was met with rejection. Joni had always been her rock, her guide, but now she felt like her mother was a stranger. The emotional distance that had started as a small crack had now become a massive chasm, and Rebecca felt like she was falling through it. The woman she had always admired seemed so distant, so focused on her own desires, that it was as though the foundation of their relationship was crumbling before her eyes. In the days that followed, Rebecca's frustration and disappointment only grew. It wasn't just about her mother's relationship with Doug. It was about the complete breakdown in communication and trust. For years, they had shared a deep bond. But now, Rebecca felt invisible. Her mother's focus on her new life with Doug left no room for Rebecca's concerns. The Lamb family, once so tightly knit, was starting to unravel, and Rebecca didn't know how to stop it. The divide between mother and daughter continued to grow, and with it, the emotional toll on Rebecca became too much to bear. She had always been the one to speak her mind, the one to push for what was right. But now it seemed like she was fighting a losing battle. Every attempt to engage with Joni about her concerns only pushed them further apart. Rebecca felt isolated, trapped in a situation where her voice wasn't being heard, where her mother's choices were making it harder and harder for her to stay involved in the family and the ministry they had built together. As the months passed, the rift between them deepened. Joni's relationship with Doug became more serious, and Rebecca felt more and more like an outsider. She wasn't just struggling with her mother's decisions. She was struggling with the future of their family, the legacy of Marcus, and the direction of Daystar. Every day, Rebecca felt like the foundation she had known her whole life was slipping away. The tension between them was palpable, and Rebecca knew that something had to give. But the reality was, nothing was going to change unless someone made a move. Joni wasn't going to change her mind about Doug, and Rebecca couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. The emotional divide that had been building for months was now at a breaking point, and Rebecca was left standing at the edge, wondering how much longer she could hold on. The family she had known, the ministry she had helped build, was slipping through her fingers, and there didn't seem to be a way to stop it. The tension between Joni and Rebecca had become more than just a personal conflict. It had become a symbol of the broader struggles within the Lamb family. The unity they once had was gone, replaced by a growing distance that seemed impossible to overcome. As the family dynamics shifted, so did the future of Daystar. The questions that had been raised about Joni's leadership, about her relationship with Doug, and about the direction of the ministry were now unavoidable. The family was no longer united, and the foundation that had once held everything together was crumbling. The fallout from Rebecca's confrontation with her mother, Joni, was more than just a heated exchange. It was the beginning of something much deeper, something that would alter the entire structure of the Lamb family and, by extension, the future of Daystar television. The emotional toll of the family's unraveling was felt by everyone, but none more acutely than Rebecca. She had always been the voice of reason in the family, the one who called out when things weren't right. But now, as the dust settled from the confrontation, she found herself in an emotional and spiritual void, isolated from the very family she had always stood by. The emotional weight of this situation hit Rebecca hard. She wasn't just upset about the disagreement with her mother, it was much bigger than that. It was the realization that the foundation of her family, the family she had built her life around, was crumbling. The tension had been building for months, but the argument with Joni felt like the breaking point. The sharp words, the defensiveness, the growing divide, it all made Rebecca feel like she was standing on the edge of something irreparable. For years, Rebecca had been a part of Daystar television. It was her legacy, her family's legacy, something she had worked alongside her parents to build. But now, as her relationship with Joni became strained, she couldn't help but feel like an outsider in her own family. It wasn't just about the relationship with Dougweiss, although that had played a huge part. It was about how her mother had changed, how her decisions had begun to distance herself from the family they had once been. Rebecca had always admired Joni's strength, her determination, but now she was struggling to see the mother she had once known. The woman in front of her was different, distant, defensive, and seemingly unwilling to hear her daughter's concerns. As the emotional fallout from the confrontation continued, Rebecca found herself retreating further into herself. She tried to stay involved in the family business, but it felt like no matter what she did, she was only being pushed further away. The silence between her and Joni grew louder. Every day, Rebecca was reminded of the emotional distance that had formed between them. She had tried to be the voice of reason, the one who stood up for what was right, but now it felt like her voice didn't matter. Joni was too entrenched in her own decisions to listen, and Rebecca was left to process everything on her own. The family isolation wasn't just emotional. It was physical, too. Rebecca began to pull away from family events, from the ministry, from the very things that had once been the core of her life. The Lamb family had always been close-knit, but now it seemed like everyone was scattered, retreating into their own corners. Even her brother Jonathan seemed distant. Rebecca had always thought of him as someone who understood, someone who would stand by her no matter what. But as the tensions between their parents grew, Jonathan seemed to retreat into his own frustrations. The once unified family was now a collection of individuals, each struggling with their own emotional burdens.